Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and braving the road construction. I'm like coming up Denver. I rarely come up Denver. I work at 36 degrees north. I rarely come up Denver. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? And had to go all around. So thank you for coming and navigating, coming through the library. I am thrilled to be here to welcome you for this maiden voyage, if you will, of the philanthrOK, what is it, Retrospect, yes, Retrospect talk show. My name is Amy Hamilton and I am with Tulsa Tech. And one of the favorite things that I get to do as part of my job is to come be in environments like this and get to know people who are doing good in our community. My function is to provide information and support services to nonprofits, helping them know what Tulsa Tech has available in terms of training services for your team, for your staff, as well as we can also provide training for some of your clientele. So I love being able to promote Tulsa Tech because I was just talking with a lady in the back. I am a company girl. I love Tulsa Tech. I also get to work at 36 degrees north. How many of you, I'm sure a lot of you know 36 degrees north. I am Tulsa Tech's face at 36 degrees north. I'm the swag queen, and I make sure that Tulsa Tech stuff is everywhere. But I also get to work with developing some programming down there that is supporting small businesses, entrepreneurs, nonprofits. We have something called the Popcorn Series that Tulsa Tech is a sponsor of in conjunction with another member at 36 degrees north. And there's information about that back there. But that's not why you're here, is to hear me talk about me. I want us to focus our attention on this exciting, unique event that I had the opportunity, the good fortune to connect with Lindsay Jordan. She was listed on Kiva as she was raising funds for her new venture. And I saw her there and I was like, I need to know this woman. So we met for lunch and we hit it off immediately. And about 2.5 hours in, you know what those kind of lunches are like. I realized that I was really late for another meeting. And so I had to bolt out of there and I left Lindsay with the check. Now she was okay with it, but we laugh about it now. But it was a great meeting, and it developed into this relationship that we have with On Fundraising and Tulsa Tech. She became a member at 36 degrees north, and she has sat at a desk right outside my glass window, and I've really had the opportunity over this last 18 months, it's only been 18 months, to watch On Fundraising grow from being Lindsay to a team of 8 people, which is just phenomenal. Watching her creativity, her initiative, her ingenuity has just been phenomenal. And I'm grateful to not only call her a working partnership, collaborative partner, but my friend. I really enjoy her. Now I have some notes that I'm supposed to make sure I tell you about. You can see I don't tend to look at notes, but I want to make sure that I didn't forget anything. So this is the first of 6 Retrospect talk shows. And they're going to be going on throughout the year. So hopefully if this is something that you find interesting, you'll find your way back to us. They're all going to be free because of the partnership between On Fundraising and Tulsa Tech. Then there will be coffee. So for those of you who are looking for that, yes, there will be coffee. We'll entice you with that. The format of the show is Oprah-like. There's going to be a host and a guest, and I think you all know who the guest is, but I'll let that be saved for just a moment. And it's a conversational interview. The difference will be is that it's kind of cool that throughout the process, if you think of questions that you would like to ask, at the end, there's going to be time for you to ask some questions. We'll come around with the mic, so you will be speaking into a mic so everyone can hear you. And we'll have an opportunity to make it a little bit more of a dialogue than just a show on its own. The show is also, as you notice, is being filmed. What we ask is that if you feel free to get up and get coffee, and the restrooms, they're back at the back, to the right, past the elevator, and you'll find it if you keep going to the right. The restrooms are back there. We want you to feel comfortable doing what you need to do to stay comfortable if you just not walk right in front, but I think we're probably okay with where that is set up. One last thing, housekeeping, phones. Everybody's got made sure that they're on silent. I double checked mine, so if you'll just make sure. I always hate being the girl that ends up having my phone go off. So without further ado, I want to, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be able to introduce Lindsay, who is going to be, she's the founder and CEO of On Fundraising. She's the host of our talk show. And here she is. Let's give it up for Lindsay Jordan.
Good morning. I'm going to set my phone down real fast. So thanks for being our guinea pigs today. There's all cool stuff that we're trying out. We really appreciate you guys being here. This is the very first Retrospect show. I can't believe I get to say that. I'm really, really excited about it. When we were thinking about this show, I had quite a few people ask me, why are you doing a talk show? Why not a podcast or like a live tweet interview? And I get it. Podcasts are cool. Twitter is how public policy gets made now, so, I get it. However, I am a millennial, so relevance, efficiency, You are my participation trophy this morning, and I really, really appreciate you all being here. So, Retrospect is real. This is a real thing. This is a real space where we're going to talk about what it's like to be inside a nonprofit organization, which is where I got to spend my entire career fundraising before I actually launched On Fundraising. And I had an amazing career. I had the opportunity to work for some incredible organizations. One of the things that I learned working for these organizations is some of the folks who we really look up to and who we really admire, some of the ones that look like they really have it together, don't. Looking back retrospectively, kind of get the name now, there are so many things that I wish I could tell myself, that I could tell a younger Lindsay. Use your voice here. Navigate this relationship a little bit differently. Don't be ashamed of having an abundance complex. These are the things that this show is really about. Tapping into some of the folks who have been there, done that, have the battle scars to show it, to learn from their experiences and find out what they would have done differently or not at some of the most critical times in their careers. We have a great show today, and I get to say that phrase, which is really exciting. So our guest this morning is no stranger to nonprofits. She's been in the nonprofit world for a long time. Not that long, she's very spry. She could probably take me. She is the president and CEO of the Tulsa Area United Way, and formerly was the president of the Williams Foundation, which is actually where she and I met. She probably doesn't remember. I was asking for money and sweating profusely, so I'm really glad she came back. She has been on the board of the Tulsa Community Foundation, Leadership Oklahoma, Teach for America, the Association of Women in Communication, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Last week she saved 3 kittens from a burning building. Could be a rumor. She has more degrees and certifications than there are crayons in a crayon box, which probably comes in really helpful when you're raising 5 kids. She and her Mark live in Sand Springs, where they have gym dates, which as a millennial, I fully applaud. I'm not sure I could pull it off, but I fully applaud it. Can you please join me in welcoming our guest today, Alison Anthony. This is so cool. Do you feel like, Oprah, we don't have any cards to give away today?
I was waiting for the card, but I do. I'm just excited to be here with you for your first.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great. We have a partner agency executive director meeting going on at the Tulsa Area United Way, where there's 59 partner agency executive directors who probably could answer a lot of these questions better than I can. But I'm excited to be here with you,
Well,
and thank all of you for being here. it's not easy to get into the library right now. So I appreciate your fortitude and your endeavor.
Well, I want to start by pointing off our shoes because
That's
I feel like this is the most important part of the day is that we have matching shoes.
It was an accident.
It
A happy
was.
accident.
I'm pretty happy with it though. So, what we're going to talk about today, today's topic is really kind of taking a deep dive into a lot of the wonderfully philanthropically minded people in the Tulsa area. One of the best parts about my job, and I think Allison's job too, is that we get to meet people who do incredible things all the time. A lot of those folks already work in the nonprofit industry, but many of them have for-profit 9-to-5 gigs, and they just want to make an impact on their community, which is why today's topic came to the very tippy top of our list. So I wanted to start off this morning, Allison, by just getting your perspective about corporate versus nonprofit world. I feel like people who are thinking about that move sometimes want to make it because they feel like if they work for a nonprofit, they'll have more impact or they'll feel more fulfilled with their job. Do you think that people who work for nonprofits are more fulfilled than people who work for corporations?
I think if you've started with your why, I'm going to keep like pushing this back on you, unfortunately, and you've gotten clarity around your higher purpose and what you want to do, and that aligns with your nonprofit work and your talents and your abilities, then I think absolutely you might be living your best life, to quote Oprah, right? So, but also, it's fulfilling, but what if you're, Linda Jenkins, who has a ton of experience in strategic planning, and you decide, I want to work for a nonprofit, so you take an accounting clerk job or something. That's not going to, so I think that for me, it's always about, no matter where you work, making sure that you're lining up your talents and your knowledge and your skills and your abilities with the role at hand. That's the most important thing, and starting with that why. Also, why are you seeking a change? Are you running away from something or someone? Now what I will say about the someones is sometimes I was having this conversation, I won't tell you, I have 5 children, so I can use them as examples and not out them, because there's a lot of them. But one of them called me at 7:59 this morning, was like, I gotta do something different, I gotta make a change. And I said, well, sometimes the universe has to get a little bit loud for you to pay attention that you're not in the right place. And so they might make things the universe might become increasingly obnoxious to get you to move into your next great thing. And, that's the way we talk at my house. We're yogis and we have wait dates, as Lindsay was talking about. But so I think making sure that you're not running away from something, but finding out what you're running toward. Is it the passion or your curiosity in the nonprofit content, the area? Are you interested in domestic violence? Are you interested to work with children? So those things to me are more important, whether you can find your passion and purpose in for-profit too. I think that sometimes those awful situations are so important when you find yourself in a job that's awful or a bad match. And some of you have heard me say this, but the enemy of finding you're great, the enemy of being great is what? Good. So when things are fine, things are okay, you're probably sticking around and hanging in there. But sometimes things have to get bad, so you say, this isn't where I'm supposed to be. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing.
What are some of the values that you have connected with most clearly, and how have they impacted your work?
I will say sometimes you learn more from bosses that you don't want to be like, right? I mean, you can learn from sometimes it takes working with people that you think, wow, we really have different values, and you can learn from that too. And those are great lessons. But to me, guiding values, I remember being on a plane in 2001. So I had a baby at home and four bigger kids. And I was on a plane coming back from a work event. And at some point, Elizabeth Dole spoke at this event, and I remembered her talking about her guiding principle, her mission. And I thought, well, if Elizabeth Dole has a mission, I should have a mission, you know. And so I wrote my personal mission at that point that, do the people and causes most important to me know that they are? Do the people and causes most important to me know that they are?
So do they?
They do. They do. Mostly. Not always. You know, one of my underlying guiding principles was, we can't always do, but when we can, we do. You know. So I think that I start with that guiding principle, but then also making sure that I'm another guiding principle. Can I, in this role, in this situation, be authentic and truthful? And if the answer to that is no, I mean, we all have to flex to some degree in every situation, but if the answer is no, then I'm not in the right place, because that's a value for me, a guiding value. And then the third, what I would say my third primary guiding value is, can I look in the mirror every night and know that I worked hard and that work mattered? Mm-hmm. And so those are guiding principles that help me end up where I am now. And, you know, I also just want to say that it's a long, what does Gretchen Rubin say? The days are long, but the years are short. You know, things go fast. And, but it is a long career. You know, I'm 55 and I feel like I have a few good years left in me. But, you know, every job I can look back on in retrospect and know what I learned and what I got out of that. And I tell my kids, treat every job like a grand interview for the next thing. And what are you learning from it? And what can you take with you? And if you keep following your curiosities along the way and keep looking at every opportunity as a lesson learned and not as a tragedy, you know, that you're in that job. Okay, what am I learning here? Even if the only thing you're learning is what kind of boss you don't want to be.
Right, which is a very important lesson.
Right.
Very important lesson to learn. So that kind of leads me into my next question, which is, so often the things that we learn that help us connect to our core values come with some level of like tragedy or adversity. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the things that I have learned, kind of one of my own personal hangups, is that I always assume that people who are older than me know better than me. So I've taken some terrible advice from people who are older than me, and that was a tough lesson for me to learn, and I had to learn it through making some mistakes. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to connect with our core values and what is important, in your opinion, while mitigating some of the trauma that comes along with some of that?
Wow, that's a very Oprah-esque question. You know, I mean, some of this may sound, I'll just say it, some of this may sound a little woo-woo to you, and I get that. I grew up in a very pragmatic, logical, my father's a scientist, a physician, and it was, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you know, come up with a hypothesis and test it and all these things. And over time, I learned that the best answers are within us and that we access those through stillness. I know.
That's so hard.
And I like to go, and I like to, just a funny aside, my team at Williams called me mayonnaise, and it was from it was a code word, and it was from an old movie, Night Shift, with Henry Winkler and Michael Keaton in the early 80s. And Michael Keaton would go, I have an idea. And he carried around a tape recorder. Feed mayonnaise to tuna fish. And then there's mayonnaise in the can. And you know, which happened, by the way, like it exists, it's in a pouch, but it's the same philosophy. But I have a lot of ideas, and I can exhaust people around me. And I'll say, I have an idea, and 4 or 5 people would yell, mayonnaise, meaning like they're still executing on the last 4 or 5 ideas I had, right? So it is not my nature to be still. But I start every day with meditation, and I try to do yoga about 3 times a week, and weightlifting, you know, a couple days a week with my husband. But accessing that stillness for me, and sometimes putting out there, like, I'm really having a challenge with this person, or I'm, you know, and so if I'm guided with compassion and kindness and grace, can I find an answer within me? And it may take a while. It may not happen. But if you don't be still, it probably won't happen. And if you're always looking to other people to find the answers, then they're not always going to be the right answers. Sometimes the answers have to come from within you. Usually the answers come within you because they need to be aligned with your values and your strengths. You can learn a lot from other people. I mean, I'm looking across this room. I've learned from most of you in some way. But being a lifelong curious learner and then taking that input and running it through your rinse cycle of your own values and strengths and higher knowledge that's inside you, that takes stillness.
I agree with you. When I was trying to start right on fundraising, I had to sit still for a while, which is by far the worst 3 months of my life, was to try and hold still while a 2-year-old is running circles around you. But it was really important and really critical. So I think that what you outlined there has a lot of truth to it. So let's change direction here a little bit. I got to check the time. One of the sentiments that I hear a lot of, which I have always found really interesting, and I have never been able to adequately rebut it, even though I would really like to, is the idea that nonprofits are just corporations that don't have to pay taxes.
Wow.
Or the other one I've heard is that marketing for nonprofits is way easier than marketing for a corporation. Whew. So can you address those things? Is there any truth in that? What are the real differences between the two? What are the real similarities?
Real differences and real similarities. Okay, first of all, I think, for-profit and nonprofit tells you one of the basic similarities, the main motivation. Starting with the main motivation is that a company, a business exists to make money and can also, and I think the great news is, this is fabulous news, more companies, more for-profit businesses are understanding the value of social consciousness and contributing to the better good.
Absolutely.
So,
social enterprise, B
yeah,
corporation.
It's great
all
stuff.
this.
There's great stuff out there. But at the end of the day, they have a bottom line that they're managing. Now, nonprofit doesn't mean you don't have a budget. It means that you exist for a different purpose. United Way exists to unite people and resources to improve lives and strengthen the community. Williams, where I worked before, still tried to do some of those things, but its primary responsibility was to its stakeholders and shareholders who own stock.
Right.
And to a lesser extent, in most corporations that are publicly owned, to their employees. But frankly, as we know, that most Fortune 500 and publicly traded companies, they really feel like their primary responsibility is to their stockholders. So in some of the differences, there's great diversity and opportunity to wear a lot of hats in nonprofit. I think that's one thing. If that's something that's important for me, I have attention deficit disorder. My kindergarten teacher called it very impatient. I call it driving quickly for results now, because I get to define my own now. But in kindergarten, it was impatient and ADD. So, but diversity is really important to me, and diversity in all of its facets. But what I'm talking about here is diversity of every day is interesting and different. And I think in a nonprofit, you likely would have an opportunity more than in a corporation to wear a lot of hats. However, I consider nonprofits very entrepreneurial. We're using the book Traction by Gino Wickman, which is an entrepreneurial operating system to do our strategic planning, because I think the nonprofits have to be innovative and entrepreneurial to succeed, and not just do things the same way that they've always done them. And so the things I learned in for-profit around getting the right people in the right seats, still critical, developing talent, not underutilizing talent, absolutely critical, giving your best talent great development opportunities and letting them run with it, understanding that you can't do anything by yourself, really. I mean, you have to rely on a team if you want to grow. And I think measuring what matters, using data, and having good processes, and knowing why having a common shared vision. All those things are still critical. Mm-hmm. It's just that the ultimate motivation might be just slightly different. Mm-hmm. I think also purpose-driven, but long hours still. And there's a lot of burnout in nonprofits.
Right. It's very, for fundraisers, the average length of employment within a nonprofit is 18 months. And I recently heard it was actually worse than that in Tulsa. It's just 16 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's because if you think about the role of somebody that's raising money for a living, they don't really get to be off. Like, they go to the grocery store and they see a donor and they need to be nice, And remember, authentic and truthful are important to me. So
road rage is the enemy of a fundraiser. You can't cut off anybody because you never know when you're going to be in a meeting with them at some point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it can be draining, and there can be empathy burnout, and there can be like, wow, we keep doing important things, and we've been funding Away Home for Tulsa for a decade, and homelessness isn't going away. So how do we know we're making a difference? And how, so all of those things, and you have to find out what refuels you, and what the people that can help refuel you, and what about the work is motivating, because all those things are going to be a factor.
Right.
I also think that in a nonprofit, you might be able to more easily affect culture.
That's very interesting. Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of that?
Well, we have mindfulness on Fridays in my office at United Way. We didn't do that at Williams. I say that because I think that back to that entrepreneurial thing, I think that that your organizations, your nonprofit organizations, might be a little bit more willing to try new things. And of course, all that has to do with a leader too, and a leader's willingness to innovate and be entrepreneurial and try new things. And but there's again, if your primary stakeholder, your primary responsibility to a shareholder, it might be harder to sell something like the value of mindfulness. Now, again, I think a lot of companies are starting to understand that wellness matters, mindfulness matters, and those things. But it's easier sometimes to affect that culture, to turn that ship. Nonprofits can be a little bit more nimble, I think. A little less corporate governance. You still have a board, you still have governance, you still have bosses, but you might be able to impact the culture a little bit more.
That's interesting. So I'm going to take a quick break real fast. Gentlemen running the camera, do we need to switch out a card? I told y'all rent it. We're good. Fabulous. We're going to keep going. We'll edit this later. So final question for this morning, and then we're going to open this up to the audience for a couple of things. Looking back, you've now been at the United Way, how long, 3 years? Been
two and a half.
2.5.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back on your transition from Williams to the United Way, is there anything today that you would have told Alison 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago about where you're headed and how you're going to get there?
Well, one thing I tell all my mentees and children, and I think as you advance in your career, you need to take opportunity to know the business of the business, whatever organizations you're looking at. And part of that business of the business is knowing the books and knowing the bottom line. I think the great thing about considering a career in nonprofit is that you can try it on. You can be on a finance and audit committee for a nonprofit. Very important to understand the finances and what it looks like. So if you're considering, and you're an accountant in a corporation, or you have a finance degree and you're thinking, wow, I want to be an ED of a nonprofit, which would be a great transition with those skills. You can try it on by being a member of a finance and audit committee, but you can try it on by getting on an event committee. You can volunteer for a marketing committee and say, let me help you with your social media. It's terrible. Your nonprofit social media is terrible, and let me help you. And you would be less blunt than that, but you would make that. You can add value and try those things on those are things I don't know that I would have done anything differently, but I recognize now all the value of all of those committees. And I will be honest with you, I have never had a job ever that I didn't first volunteer or raise my hand and have it evolve into that job eventually. Ever.
Can you share with us what maybe one of the most impactful volunteer roles that you've served on was that maybe prepared you for that job?
I think one of the most significant was in 2000 at Williams when I was in HR and performance management and training. The then executive director of diversity and inclusion, Eric Watson, and Michael Johnson, who is the senior vice president, asked me if I would lead I think we called it a women's networking circle, which sort of sounded like we might be knitting. And we were knitting some things together, trust me. But so we were kind of under the radar, but it grew. And it grew, and so from 2003 until 2012, then I formally ended up wearing a hat of a director of diversity inclusion and other things. And that has been a lifelong passion for me. It's been work I was doing in some form or capacity as a volunteer or otherwise since the 80s.
Wow.
But stepping up and saying, yes, I'll start this networking circle and see where it goes, made a huge impact on my career, my family values, my children's lives, and in 2008, we got domestic partner benefits at Williams. In 2003, we added sexual orientation to the non-discrimination policy and had hundreds of protest emails. By 2008, we had like 60 emails and like 40 of them were, hey, good idea. Comp equity, so seeing change and
Wow, that's incredible.
yeah, it was incredible. So I would say that one was the most significant, and raising my hand and saying, yeah, I'll do that, and taking that opportunity. I think where interest and abilities meet need in an organization is where your best career development sweet spot can be.
All that from my knitting group. Would you like to start a Bloody Mary group with me?
I think we could explore that.
Okay, well, we're going to do some audience questions. Let me check the time again real fast. Oh, we're in good shape. So for about the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to take some questions. I'm going to give you my microphone. So if you have something you'd like to ask Alison, just shoot your hand up in the air, and Amy's going to bring our microphone around.
Amy, that blue is beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you could stand when you ask your question.
So you talk about the role of entrepreneurism in nonprofits, which is something I'm interested too. How do you balance the new organizations forming that are very entrepreneurial with older, more mature organizations trying to lean into entrepreneurism? What have you seen from your seat, and what would you encourage each of them to do and learn from each other?
Wendy Thomas, that is one of the most interesting parts of my transition into the United Way, which is a 96-year-old organization. And I think that change management around change and around doing things in a different and new way has been probably the hardest thing. And it's even harder because the Tulsa Area United Way is a very successful organization. So the balance is, or how to navigate it is, I think, getting pretty structured about a common vision and how we're going to measure success, and are we doing the things that are going to get us there, and are we who going and doing. I do everything. I do stakeholder maps, stakeholder universe, what planets are in the universe, donors, volunteers, partner agencies, community collaborations like Leadership Tulsa. So if you start with all that and you say, are we uniting the people and resources to improve lives and strengthen the community for the next 100 years, and how are we measuring that? To me, that's where you get traction, which is the name of the book that we're using. That's how you get traction, is getting everybody moving in the right direction. And we're doing some things like right people, right seat, pretty, I'll say hardcore for a nonprofit, and not everybody likes it. Asking, like, these are defining our values, and then saying, Put a plus or a minus or a plus and minus about how that person is living out those values at work. And then also asking the question, does the person get it, their role and the organization's role? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to do it? This knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's a little bit more deep talent development and people analysis than I think some nonprofits like to do, some for-profits, frankly. But I think to really get traction and move forward, you've got to be going in the right direction and willing to accept change together. So that's it. It's been fascinating, and I think the more successful the organization, the harder it is to make necessary changes.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So you mentioned something about how companies are thinking more about their social consciousness, and my work really touches on how foundations and for-profit organizations think about their impact. You also talked about community need, and sometimes when organizations think about their purpose, it doesn't necessarily connect to the needs in the community. How do you think about that in terms of who you bring to the table and what voices aren't represented in those decisions?
I think the where you ended your question is where I would start answering the question, and that is going back to what I said about stakeholder universe mapping. To hear those words, well, I would start with the stakeholder universe map. Sounds very corporate and very goofy, and what it really means is when there is a problem and a challenge, or you also hit on something very important, is your funders, the donors, the companies, the businesses they want to lift up something because it's strategically aligned to their business that may not be a good fit for your organization. And you have to get, as a nonprofit, really clear about your purpose. Now, I'm kind of the Annie, or Addie, Ado Annie of Oklahoma, a girl that just can't say no, which is also probably why I have 5 kids. But you can edit that out. You can edit. I heard her say, you can edit. Sorry, I promised my staff that I wouldn't go there, but I did. But I hear ideas and think, wow, that's a great idea. But you have to be really disciplined to stay clear to your purpose and those kinds of things. So what I think that when a donor brings you an idea or a community collaboration brings you an idea, you first look around and say, who's at the table? Who's missing from the table? Are the people that are going to be impacted by this work represented? Are the other people that might be interested in funding this around the table? I think that stakeholder mapping on the front end is so important, and understanding your organization's purpose and not just becoming a Gumby pretzel trying to mold yourself into whatever, because I understand, I was at Williams and that, we had corporate community impact strategy. And so for us to fund something, it had to fit in our strategy. And then we might say, well, but what would be really helpful to us if you would do this? Well, if that doesn't further your mission's impact, it's probably not a good fit. Does that answer?
We probably have time for one more question.
And there's a lot of people in this room that can answer your questions later too. Linda Jenkins, Wendy Thomas, Susie Bogle, lots of brilliant nonprofit professionals.
Hello.
Hi.
I am at a small startup nonprofit and constantly putting out different fires. My question is, how do you determine which fire is the most important? And then also, how do you give yourself grace and understanding when it's just you putting out these fires so that you don't have any burnout?
You heard us talk. You heard us talking about the fact that nonprofits have a lot of burnout because you do have it. The things that you're putting into your work are so connected to your values, and you can't disconnect that. And so I think self-care is a commonly and probably overused term. But I think when you are the nonprofit and you are doing this work, a couple of things, and I'm going to tie it back to your question a little bit. Sometimes I think you want to step back and say, should I be my own nonprofit, or and I'm not saying this is your case, I have no idea, but sometimes I think it's okay to step back and say, should I be my own nonprofit like Changemakers was, that is now part of Leadership Tulsa? So I have this great idea. It's growing beyond my capacity or my time to do it. Could I join with another more evolved or an organization that might be a little farther along in their journey and make greater impact and share services and share resources and move it farther along? So that's, I think, a one question to really ask yourself. How much of my ego is in this versus how much am I concerned about the impact? So recently someone came to us and said, we want United Way to do this. And I said, well, what we really need to do is convene a meeting of people who are interested in this effort and find out who the right organization is to take it and run with it. It's not necessarily us, right? So that's one thing. The self-care is you have to set your own boundaries. And I'm going to be really transparent. Raising the 26 million plus this year wore me slick. Like, I was tired at the end. And then we go right from fundraising into what I call giving birth to the triplets. Mark Graham probably never called it that. But it's going right into comp committee, because then we know how much money we're going to have, going into the budgeting process, going into executive committee and making sure that all the people get the raises that they deserve. And it was exhausting. And I finished the year with a lot of self-reflection to say, I have to set better boundaries, and I have to have the right people in the right jobs to do their job. And so I'm just going to say, you can't do it alone. So you either have to get more help through your volunteers, people that share your passion and are willing to do it without pay. You have to join with another organization. You have to raise enough money to fund positions. If the need is real, then there's probably people that'll help you fund to grow. So am I missing you guys in the professional space? Am I missing other ways to get through that transition?
I think this from the self-care component. I'm terrible at self-care. I'm like the worst advocate for self-care.
You only get one of these. You only
know.
get one body. You only get one body. And you change your oil, you clean out your refrigerator, like you move houses when yours gets too full of stuff. You get a bigger house for more stuff. But you only get one body. And so the sooner that you realize that, you brush your teeth every day, you should move your body and eat healthy, because you only get one of these.
I find that having, and again it's overused, but an accountability buddy.
Absolutely.
Mine is my husband, because he's super into taking care of himself. We have very different work philosophies. But having someone in my life who holds me accountable to say, stop, it's time to take a break, helps a lot, or I probably would never slow down. And it doesn't have to be your husband. It can just be a good friend or a family member or whomever. But having that accountability is really helpful too.
Well, let's be clear. I quit doing work-life balance workshops because I was a big phony. But I was like, I don't know if somebody can tell. That. Yeah, but I know this about myself, and so I have to manage it. The accountability is really important, and getting clear on. The other thing is getting clear on purpose and a timeline and how you're going to get there, so you can set realistic expectations. But accountability can look a lot of different ways. Some of you have heard me say, I said out loud at a yoga retreat where I just was going to go and hang out kind of quietly, and they went around the circle and they said, why are you here this weekend? Share why you're here. And I said, and I was still at Williams, and I said, I'm here because it's time for me to find a new job, and I need to focus and think about it, put some energy into finding a new job that's more aligned with my values where I am right now in my life. And 40 yomis, I call them yoga homies, around the room said, so shall it be, or better. So shall it be, or better. But until you can say what it is, it's hard to say, so shall it be.
Right.
So you've got to work with yourself, start with yourself, get input from others, and then set your accountability. And I will tell you, 2 weeks later, Mark Graham called me and said, hey, I know you got a really good job at Williams. Would you be interested? I want to retire, but I can't until I find somebody to take my place. And conversations began. And I remembered those yogis sitting around the room going, so shall it be or better?
So shall it be or better. That's great. Thank you, Allison. Can we get a round of hands, please?
Thank you guys
for Allison today.